All right, in this chapter, we're actually going to start working with databases and create our tables and put some data into it. So I am in here at the main page of Welcome to MySQL Workbench. So when you open this up, make sure you open up the workbench instead of the command line. And just here it's showing my SQL connections that were set up during the install process. If you haven't installed the product yet, you need to stop here and go look at the instructions in the module in the textbook to get the product installed. But once it's here, what we're going to do is just click on that, and it's going to open up our workspace. So a couple of things that we'll use more of these things along, but most of our work is going to be done here in the query window. And we'll be concerned with our output actions here. Our output will take, a couple of different forms depending on what we're doing. It'll either show us if we've had success with the SQL command we've created, or it'll give us errors there. And then when we actually start to look at data with our queries, then we'll actually see the data that was selected in the query. So I'm going to run through the basics of this chapter. I'm going to show you how to create a database, how to insert data into tables, and a couple of other things. And then what I'm going to do is show you how to load the KimTay database, and then you can follow the same steps for loading the Staywell, the two example databases. And those files can be found in the resources, but also they're located in this module. So instead of typing all that data in, I've provided those files that you can copy and paste into this window. So let's get started. What we're going to do is we're going to set out by creating a database called practice, and we issue the command create database, and we give it a name. You need to review the naming conventions in your textbook, but generally speaking, you can't have spaces. Special characters are problematic. Now, see, I have a little red line there because I've made a typo to start off. So database practice. And you'll get used to it if you're not already from your programming languages of putting a semicolon at the end. So we've created our first SQL statement here, and we have some options up on this little toolbar, and I'll use these interchangeably depending on what I'm doing. And I just want to tell you the difference between these two, which are your run buttons. If you select the lightning bolt, what it'll do is it'll execute whatever you've highlighted in your code, or if you haven't highlighted, it'll run everything. So you'll see as we go along that we can use this kind of as a workspace and run certain things now, run certain things then, instead of retyping things. So that's the button we'll use if we're going to select what we're going to do in our code that exists, or if we want everything on the work area to run. This next button that has the little lines on it will actually only execute the statement that you just typed. So I'll try to remember to point these out as I go, and I know for sure I'll use the other one when we start loading up our KimTay database. So if I click here, what I do is it runs it, and down here in our action output, we see that it was successful. A little green check is what we're looking for. If we get a little red error, we're going to have to go back and hunt down problems just like we would if we were doing programming in C# or something like that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tell it that from here on out, when we're working today in this session, we want to use that database that we just created. Your MySQL program can run multiple databases at a time, and so you do need to be specific on which one you want to do it. So when we start adding tables, it'll know which database to add the tables to. So we click our little button here, we tell it we're going to use practice, and we get a green check mark. So far, so good. I promise you I'll make some typos along the way that will get an error. If not, I will be amazed. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our table. We're going to name this table student. And what we're going to do first is we're going to identify what columns are going to be in the table, and we're going to define the data type of what's going to go in those. So I'm going to start out with student ID. And then I'm going to tell it that this is going to have character, and that it is going to be 9 digits long. Now, when you're choosing this is back to database design, you want to make sure that this database parameter doesn't restrict data. So for example, if we had 9999999 as our last statement, the next student we added would have a 10-digit student ID, and our database wouldn't be able to accommodate that. So you need to have robust limits on what your data is. We're also going to set this as the primary key of this table. So we're then going to go ahead and add their first name. This is also going to be car, and let's give it 20 characters. Notice these columns I'm separating by a comma. Let's do last name. We're going to do car 20 on that one. Let's do middle name and do a car 20 on that one. And then let's add their address, which let's make this a little bit longer. Car 30. Their city. We'll set that at car 22. No reason not to. We'll set the state. We're going to have a 2-digit state only. And then we're going to have birthday, if I can spell it correctly, birthday. And then we're going to have this be a date. And we don't have to have anything in parentheses because the date format is fixed. And so we don't need to tell it if it's going to be X number of characters long. It is a fixed format. And don't forget to close the parentheses that we opened up when we started our column names, and then finally put that semicolon on. So what we're doing here is we're creating a table in our database that has student ID set as the primary key that's 9 digits long, 9 alphanumeric characters long, first name 20, last name 20, middle name 20, address 30, city 20, state 2, and then birthday is our set format. So let's go ahead and run that. And down here in our action output, we get a little green thing that shows us that our table was created. Now our table at this point is empty, and I'm going to go ahead and show you a select statement. The select statement actually retrieves data from the table, and since there's nothing in it, it's not going to be very exciting at this point. But I'm going to select everything, which is asterisk, and we'll go over this more in the next chapter, from the table that I want to see. So I'm going to just select all from student. I'm going to run that. And you'll notice our result grid comes up. Our action output shows here and shows that our select statement was successful. But our result grid is what will show up when we actually look at the data. And you'll see all of these null values show us that there's no data in the table at this time. So let's put some data in there. This one's going to be a little bit painful. We're going to insert into student. And we're going to use the values keyword. Now what I'm doing when I don't specify the fields that I'm inserting data into, that means I have to have a value that matches up with each column that I'm entering. So I have to have a student ID, a first name, a last name, a middle name, an address, a city, state, and a birthday. If I leave one of those out, my statement is going to fail, and I'll show you how to insert null values with our next student. But we're going to go ahead and insert into student the values, and now I just have to type some data. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So notice that my car data is separated, is enclosed in quotes, and each of my values is separated by a comma. So let me just go ahead and put me into the database first, and you need to put it in the order that it's in. If I had put my middle name here, then it would have actually put it would have put them in the order. So if I had done Leah Ann Schultz, it would have put Ann in as my last name. So you need to pay attention. I'm going to put my middle name in. I'm going to misspell it, A-N-N-E. My middle name's actually A-N-N. Come back and correct that in a little bit. I live on 123 Main Street in Stephenville. Misspelled, but that's okay. We can always come back and change that. Texas. And then my birthday. Notice I didn't have a zip code, So I don't put a zip code in. If I did, it would try to put it into the birthday and it would wonk up pretty badly. Now, for the birth date, we're not going to put it in, we are going to put it in quotes, but we have to make sure that we put it in the correct format. And the correct format is going to be year dash month dash date. Okay, so close those parentheses and put your semicolon on. So we're inserting into the table student the values, student ID, first name, last name, middle name, address, city, state, and then finally birthday. So let's run that. And you can see that we get a little, wow, I'm surprised I didn't make a typo. We get a little green mark, and we can again do our select statement. If I don't want to type it again, I can come back up here where it already is, and I can use our other lightning bolt that then shows us our data in, and you can see how that can be handy. So instead of select all from student over and over and over again, I can type it once and then come back into my code somewhere, highlight it, and run it as many times as needed. Okay. So let's go ahead and put in another person into our database. This time we're going to put in some null values, or we're going to have it put in null values. Let's pretend this person, we don't know their address. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert into student. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to be very specific on which fields we're going to fill out. And we're going to do that in parentheses right after our insert into student statement. So we're going to put in this person's student ID, their first name, their last name, and their birthday. So what that means is we're going to tell it to only put in the values that I provide for these four things and put in null data or leave null data in the fields. So insert into student those fields, and then the values that we want to put in, we're going to put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. First name is John. Well, John. Last name is Doe. We don't have middle name. We don't have any address information. We just have his date of birth, which was 1987-08-09. We'll see. All right, so what we should see now this time, let me go ahead and run that statement. I'm going to choose again the lightning bolt with the 2 lines, so it'll just execute the statement I just did. It tells me that it was successful. And again, I can come up here, highlight my select statement, click this lightning bolt that doesn't have the lines on it, and I can now see that Leah Schultz, Anne, and John Doe, and notice the null values where we don't have values for that data or for those columns. All right, so we have to fix something. Let's go ahead and fix my middle name. What we're going to do is use the update command. We have to tell it what table we're going to do this in. And we're going to use the set command. So we're going to update the student table, and we're going to set a column equal to the value, oops, underscore here, equal to the new value. So we're going to take that E off. Now we can't leave it there because we have to tell it which student we need to make that update on. So we're going to add a where clause, and you'll use where clauses tons with your select statements in the next chapter. But for now, we're going to say where student ID is equal to, and then we put my student ID in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the database goes in, finds student ID number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and updates the column name value to Anne. So let's run that. We get a success. It tells us that 1 row matched and that 1 was changed. So we go up here, we run our select statement, and it shows us now that my middle name is changed without the E. And I could correct Stephenville that way too. I would just set city equals Stephenville with an N where student ID equals that. Okay. So that is our update. Now, sometimes you're done. You need to drop the table. And as we go through these SQL statements, we can actually make changes and updates to not only the data, but the table. So as you're going through the exercises, if you ever wonk up your tables or your databases, you can go back and create them from scratch using the files that I provided. So here I'm going to drop the table and I just tell it which table I want to drop. So I drop table student. I run that. And I get an error. Oh, so here's when I didn't pay attention. Right now it's telling me that it tried to create database practice and it says it can't create database practice because database exists. I clicked this one, which means nothing was highlighted. So it went back to my very first comment and tried to run that command. Whereas I wanted to actually just click this one to drop the table student. And if I want to, I can drop the database practice. So when I do that, that means that the database is completely gone now. The reason I show you these because you not only do you need to know them in general, but if you recreate your tables, you have to pay attention to whether the database exists. Okay. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this and still use the same window. And you can't see this off screen, but what I'm doing is I'm going into Notepad and I'm copying all of the code needed to create our ChemTA database. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in. So you notice it's a lot of insert statements. Here's our create table. We have a drop table if exists. And what that's doing is it's double checking to see if there's a table that was already named invoice line because you have an old iteration of it. You need to drop it first before you can create it again or you'll get an error. So this is the code, and like I said, this is available in the module. It's going to put some data into your ChemTA database for you. You'll need to do this for ChemTA and for Staywell. But the one thing I wanted to show you right off the bat is this file starts with the drop table if exists. So if you're doing this for the first time, you need to add your create database ChemTA. Okay. And then you also have to use ChemTA. All right. Now these are left out because it's assuming that you're going to redo these databases over and over again. So the first time you do this, it creates the database and tells you to use the database. However, if you've dropped them, you need to redo these. But from the very beginning, we don't have that. So I'm going to go ahead and run my database. Remember, I used the lightning bolt without the lines on it. Apparently I already have ChemTA in here, so let me just go ahead and drop it first real quick. Hold on. Drop database ChemTA. So you wouldn't have to do this part, but since I already have it installed, I have to drop it first. So I'm going to run that and notice that I have a whole lot of things that happen down here in my action window. It inserted all those values. It created all those tables. It created the database. And so it created the database, it used that database, created tables, inserted values, created tables, inserted values. So you can use this file over and over again instead of having to retype all that stuff if you mess your database up. But we can just go in here and we can say select all from customer and just see what our database looks like at this point. So it shows up, I typed it, select all from customer. Select all from customer. I put them in the wrong order. So I run that, and there are my customers from the ChemTA database. So that's really all we're going to cover in this chapter. I know it was long, but getting both these databases set up is important. You can follow along with the examples and practice on ChemTA database, and most of your comments are going to, most of your